Emerald and Green class, and welcome to a geography lesson this afternoon. And this geography lesson has a huge amount of history in it. So it's showing the links between how historical events have changed a place. Okay, so this is the human side of geography. Has a little bit of land use at the end, but we'll have a little look at it now. Okay, we're going to be looking at how London became a city, how it became a capital city. So where is London? I want you to pause the video to answer some of the questions today. So making sure that you pause the video now and see if you can have a look at those those maps and see if you can find London on this map. You'll have to find the UK first, and here we go. And London, don't forget, we have cities positioned where rivers are. Okay, and we talked about that, those trading links, those trading routes. We've got Plymouth down here, we've got London, we've got Liverpool on here. Okay, so London is in this area here, and we've got, coming around the south coast here, we've got Dover this side, then Folkestone is this little bump, second bump. Third bump round here is Dungeness. Okay, so we're around here. It's about 80 miles to London. Okay. Oh, let me just go back there. I'm just going to point out Colchester for you, which is an important, we'll mention that later on. So Colchester's on this side. Okay, and we talk about that a bit later. So first thing you can notice here in London, we've got a big purple line around the edge of it. Anybody think what that purple line could be? It is the M25. It's a big road, it's a motorway, 3 and 4 lanes in places. This is called Greater London. So London City is in the middle, you can see City, and these are the London boroughs or London areas around the outside. We have the River Thames going through with a lovely big U-bend here. I love that. And then the city in the middle, and then the roads round to this side. This is actually the M26 here, and that's the M20. They join, and then they go into Maidstone, following the road down to Ashford and towards towards the A20 towards Dover. Okay, so this goes eventually, this road here joins, links the M25 to a lot of other roads coming out. The reason it was built is to stop traffic going through London, but it's become a unique road in its own right. It's extremely busy. Who built London? So let's have a talk. When this shows, you've got these little question marks, have a little pause and talk to somebody or talk aloud. Who were the first people to live in London? How old do you think London is? Has it always looked like this? Okay, so pause the video now and get ready to restart. Okay, so we've got the Romans invaded Britain in AD 43, so that's roughly 2,000 years ago, and they built a settlement, so a small place called Londinium, on the banks of the river. That river is the River Thames, and about 60 years later, Londinium was the new capital city of Britain and had a population of around 60,000 people. And it took over from Colchester, which was the previous capital city of Britain. Okay, that's why I showed you Colchester. This model from the Museum of London shows that settlement, what it might have looked like on the north side of the river in around about AD 60. It's quite different to how it is now. It's just a model of it, just for interest. So how did London change? After the Romans left in 410 AD, an Anglo-Saxon settlement called Lundenwic was built west of the Roman settlement, outside the Roman city walls. Romans get in, first thing they do is they protect their space, and they build a city wall. Okay, so in AD 800, so that's roughly 750 years after the Romans arrived in Britain, Lindenwick was attacked by the Vikings. Okay, so this is another group of invaders that have come from Scandinavia, so that's Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and they attacked in various different places and at various times. They attacked the north coast as well of Britain and into Scotland, and they renamed it Lundenburg. So you can see where this London, the idea of this London word, came from. So after another invasion, the Normans, these are coming up from Normandy, from France, okay, in AD 1066. So this is about 1,000 years after the original Roman invasion. Many forts were built. Fortifications just means very well protected buildings, okay, and they were built including the Tower of London, which has an amazing Norman keep, okay, an amazing Norman building. So in AD 1209, London Bridge was built to replace lots of similar wooden bridges. It was the only stone and crossing until it was the only bridge crossing until 1739. So for 500 years, there was just one stone-built bridge going over the river. Population was about 80,000. So between 1485 and 1603, we had this very powerful and rich family called the Tudors, which were our royal family. Okay, you might think of the Henry VIII as probably being the most famous or infamous of our kings at that time, kings and queens. So London was relatively small, but the River Thames gave that really important trading link to newly discovered America. Lots of trading companies developed, so that's trading goods, and that carries on for the next few hundred years. Immigrants from other parts of the UK came into London, and as well, people decided that it's a nice, it's a rich place, a good place to live. About 250,000 people living in London at that stage. Right, good question for you. Think back to your previous learning. What happened in London in AD 1666? And you remember, it's the Great Fire of London, and it destroys half the city. And you can see here, this is the picture of the city, and you can see that white space here is the River Thames running through. White space is the destruction of that fire. Massive fire. It did do a good thing in that it wiped out the plague in London. So it had a had a positive side as well. Lots of new buildings built out to the west of the city. The year before that Great Fire, they had this terrible plague, very similar. Well, it has similarities to the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, but the COVID-19 is a world pandemic. There were plagues in other parts of the world, but this was a really terrible plague. It was extremely catching, and 60,000 people died, which is less than the numbers from COVID. But there were a lot less people living in London at that time. So extremely dangerous, and very little to no such thing as vaccines, no real medicine at that time. Very limited medical support. So terrible times. But 17808 saw that completion of the rebuilding of London after the Great Fire, and this building that was built, absolutely amazing building, built by Christopher Wren, who did a lot of the designs for rebuilding after the plague of London. And the population of London is around about 1 million by this time. And by the Victorian period, London is then has become an extremely important capital, because it's linked to the British Empire. So this is the spread of empire, spread of control of other countries. So trading and finance were becoming really important to London and the UK. Immigrants were moving in because it was so popular. The population rose to 6.7 million, and it continued to grow. More housing was built around about the turn of the century, between 1700 and 1800, and landmarks such as Trafalgar Square, Big Ben and Tower Bridge were built. This one here is Tower Bridge. It's the one where the road goes up in the air. It sort of flaps open like this to let the ships through. So early 20th century, from 1930 onwards, London continues to grow. People wanted bigger, more spacious houses, semi-detached houses, and you can see these here. Oh, I'm trying to get them apart actually. They split. They're two buildings attached down the middle wall. Okay, so semi means half detached. Detached means separate. So half detached, so that means half together, were built in the suburbs. The suburbs, the suburban area, urban pioneers, that's where that word comes from. Urban means sort of city and town, okay? Central. Suburban means slightly away, okay? So they're on the outside areas of London. The suburbs, or even known as the burbs, are residential, so where people live essentially, outside of a main city or town, and because of that spread of building from 1930s, the population increased to nearly 9 million. I was brought up in a house in the suburbs of London, between Croydon and Sutton, in a semi-detached house just like this one, and it was built in the 1930s. Has a Tudor style to it actually, because there was a real push, and it always has been, this idea that Tudor times and Tudor style buildings are very popular even today in the UK, in England particularly. So after the Second World War, 1939 to 1941, 1945 even, areas of London were bombed and lots of buildings were destroyed at that time. And to get more people in to rebuild those places, they went higher, okay, with their high-rise flats, to get more people into a smaller space, to replace those destroyed houses. So 1970s and 80s, the docks, so the trading through London through shipping, came to an end, and the docklands, the buildings that were used for those for goods going in and goods being stored to go out, they've been changed to housing, and a barrier was built to protect London from the tides in the River Thames. And in the year 2000, that new millennium, saw lots of building projects, including the Millennium Dome and the Millennium Wheel. They were put up for that landmark of time. And the Olympic Park was built in 2012, ready for the Olympic Games, which were known as the Friendly Games. So why was London so important in the past? Well, it was important. The early settlers chose the site because it was close to water supplies, wood and food. Wood really important for the building of ships later as well, and the land was flat for farming. If we think back to our topic with the ancient Greeks, a lot of their skirmishes and their arguments and their wars were the fact that they did not have flat land for farming. They had mountainous regions, small amount of place to grow crops. there wasn't really enough space there, which is why they were often arguing over land. Okay, so from 1485 until the early 1900s, we know London was really important for shipping and for trading, and it became, on the back of that, an important city for money markets because of that trade. Now, the Prime Meridian. What's the name of the imaginary line that divides the Earth into northern and southern hemispheres? We've done this. The Prime Meridian is an imaginary line which divides the Earth into two hemispheres, the east and the west. So we know that line. What's the name of it? Can anyone remember? That divides northern and southern hemispheres. Now we're thinking of the globe the other way around. It's been sliced down the middle, east and west. That one's called the equator, and this one is the Prime Meridian. Okay, so it's in a conference, the International Meridian Conference in 1884, they chose to make the line at 0 longitude run through Greenwich, England, because that's where the Royal Observatory was and still is. Oh, I'm hoping this hasn't been covered up. The I think my little face at the bottom is going to cover this up, I'm sorry. The conference made Greenwich 0 because most of the ships used it anyway. Okay, and there's a little ship for you. So why was it so important? Can you use these meridian lines to help you find London? So this is the equator here, and then we've got the Prime Meridian, which splits east and west. Okay, east side, west side, and you can actually, although it's an imaginary line, you can go up to the Royal Observatory site, and you can. They've drawn it on the. They've done a. They've drawn it on the floor, so you can go and stand one side of it or the other, which is quite good fun. Okay, so you're going to do a little activity now, and you've got a page of facts, and you're going to order them into. I'm just going to flip that back for you. Order them into the different time periods. Show how London has grown. Okay, there's 5 here. If you find that too tricky, and I think it's 20, there's 4 in each. Okay, so you're gonna have to cut them and sort them, then stick them in. If you find that too hard, don't worry. There is another one. There's a cool version of this which has just 3. It has AD 60, 1666, and 2012, and it has 9. I think it's 9 or 12. I can't remember now. But I think there's 9 facts to put in. Okay, so don't worry if you're struggling with that. Print out the other one and do that one. Okay, so you have to order those yourself. This is another one. This is a 7 dated sheet. It hasn't got AD 800 or AD 1945 on yours. Okay, so Mrs. Lala thought she'd make it a little bit easier as we're not in class, and it's not doing it on video is not ideal, but you know, we're trying our best. Which is why I'm rattling through this, because usually we do lots of talking and explaining. So we're just doing the best we can, aren't we? We're counting down now to getting back to school. So have a go at that and get that work done, and hope you enjoy that this afternoon. Okay, thanks very much for listening. You take care.